Brought to you by Penguin.
The Big Fail: How Our Supply Chains Collapse When We Needed Them Most. Written and read by Bethany Mclean and Joe Nocera.
For Dawn.
And for Lane and Calla. Introduction. On February 21st, 2023, 3 years after the United States first declared COVID a public health emergency, Bret Stephens of the New York Times published a column about one of the many hotly debated aspects of the country's response to the pandemic. The headline: "The mask mandates did nothing. Will any lessons be learned?" Stephens cited a study about the efficacy of masking done by the Cochrane Library, a British nonprofit that is considered the gold standard of so-called meta-analysis. That is, gathering data from a collection of other studies to draw a conclusion. The masking study looked at 78 randomized controlled trials, 6 of them during the pandemic, with a total of 610,872 participants in multiple countries. The authors of the study concluded that there was little or no evidence that masking reduced the incidence of COVID-19 in a population. In an interview with an independent science writer, Tom Jefferson, the Oxford epidemiologist who was the lead author of the study, was quite blunt in saying that there was no evidence masks worked. "We'd know if we had done trials," he said, but instead governments behaved like headless chickens. The response was fast and vicious. The public health establishment, which had long stressed the importance of masking, was quick to dismiss the study, rather than wrestle with the questions it raised. Rochelle Walensky, the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, questioned the reliance on studies done for respiratory viruses other than COVID-19 and said that her agency would continue to recommend masks in communities where COVID levels were high, including for toddlers and preschool. The sociologist Zeynep Tufekci, a New York Times contributing columnist who became a prominent voice during the pandemic, followed Stephens' column with one of her own titled, "Here's Why the Science is Clear That Masks Work." She quoted Carla Soares-Weiser, the editor-in-chief of Cochrane, who said that Jefferson had gone too far, even though Soares-Weiser didn't actually say anything different. "Given the limitations in the primary evidence," she said in a statement, "the review is not able to address the question of whether mask-wearing itself reduces people's risk of contracting or spreading respiratory viruses." There were also personal attacks aimed at Jefferson. Kelsey Piper, a journalist at Vox, dismissed Jefferson as having a number of eccentric and flatly nonsensical opinions about COVID-19. Stephens, for his part, was lambasted. "He doesn't do his homework," sneered Michael Hiltzik, a Los Angeles Times columnist. By the time the controversy faded, we were back where we started. We still didn't know whether masks work. It might be, as Stephens pointed out, that the question of whether a well-fitting, properly worn mask protects an individual is different from the question of whether a mask mandate does any good. It could be true that a mask can protect an individual. It could also be true that if people are taking masks off to eat, or not wearing them properly, or contaminating them with their hands, or not wearing them in places where contagion runs rampant, like homes, that masks don't do much to limit community-wide transmission. We just don't know. In so many ways, the mask controversy was a microcosm of the pandemic itself. During COVID-19, a mask wasn't just a mask. It was a symbol of one's politics. If you were a conservative, it was practically mandatory to scoff at masks, as well as other mitigation measures, like social distancing or lockdowns. If you were a liberal, you embraced them as life-saving measures. Opinion and pre-existing bias trumped fact-finding and scientific inquiry. Those who dissented from the liberal mainstream were silenced, rhetorically speaking, castigated for their supposed personal failings and for being, quote, wrong. Even if it's the case, and it is, that there isn't a single...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?